Content note: The Romance of a Rogue contains unhealthy relationship dynamics and the romanticization of stalking. Listen at your own risk.
Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I'm excited to read to you from The Romance of a Rogue by Ruby M. Ayres. Chapter 5. Charmian was already seated on the platform, her violin in her lap, when Christopher and Bruce Lowry arrived at the Elixir Hall that night. She returned their "good evening" with a careless nod, and occupied herself with beauty. The room seemed to fill more quickly than last night, and it was only a few moments before the dancing began. Bruce sat at the back of the platform, his pulses jerking nervously, wondering how soon he should be able to manage a few words alone with Charmian. She had not once glanced in his direction. She looked hard and preoccupied, but he noticed how her hand shook when once she raised it to put back a stray lock of hair. Was she really as agitated as he? Was her indifference just a mask? Halfway through the evening, a sudden thought came to him. When he found an opportunity, he spoke to Christopher. "All this music is strange to me. Don't you ever play any of the old stuff?" "Sometimes we do, but the popular taste is all for something fresh. It is surprising how quickly a dance tune goes out of fashion." Bruce took up a pile of music lying on a chair beside him and idly turned it over. "There was a rather pretty thing. A waltz tune, I remember," he said constrainedly. "Was it called, Destiny, or something like that?" "There is a waltz of that name, but we very seldom play it," Christopher answered. "I believe we have the music. Would you like to hear it? If you have no objection." Christopher spoke to the other members of the little orchestra, and Bruce looked at Charmian. She gave no sign when Christopher changed the program. She obediently sorted the correct music from the little heap beside her, and they began to play. To Bruce, that dreamy waltz tune brought back 100 happy memories, all of which had been shared with Charmian. He had waltzed to its mournful strains with her so often. They had had a record of it on a small gramophone, which she had insisted on taking down the river with them, and, as he listened, the winding river and overhanging willows seemed to rise before him, the sound of the distant wire, and the tap-tap of a woodpecker busy at its carpentering close by, and Charmian, in the first flush of her girlish beauty. Gone forever, those happy days. Gone, the youth from her face, and the trustful happiness from her eyes. Gone, her love for him, her belief in him. He rose hurriedly to his feet as Charmian's violin fell to the platform, and she slipped fainting from her chair. It was he who reached her first and lifted her in his arms, while after a momentary hesitation, Christopher signed to the rest of the orchestra to continue, and there was a little prophetic smile in his somber eyes as he watched Bruce carry her from the room. A cloakroom attendant came forward. "Oh, the poor dear! She said she felt ill when she came in this evening." "Get some water," Bruce said curtly. He put Charmian down in a chair in the room where the meager supper was laid for the members of the orchestra, and stood beside her gently chafing her hand. Her eyes were closed, and her face colorless, save for the ugly patches of rouge on her thin cheeks, and yet, in some strange way, she looked younger now that she was unconscious, more pathetic. The girl brought the water in a not over-clean tumbler, and forced some between Charmian's lips. Presently, her lids fluttered, and a faint color stole back to her lips. Bruce looked at the attendant. "Is she all right, do you think?" he asked hoarsely. The woman nodded. "It's only a faint. She's not fed enough, that's the trouble with her. Who could live on 2 beef sandwiches a day, I should like to know. Oh, she's coming round." Charmian sighed and opened her eyes to the rogue's face. Then she sat up with a little swaying movement. "What is it? Why?" The woman slipped a comforting arm round her. "It's all right, dearie. You fainted. It was that hot room, I expect, and this gentleman carried you out here in the cool. When you feel able, I should go straight home if I was you. Mr. Christopher won't mind. I'll tell him myself if you like." Charmian gently disengaged herself from the kindly arms. "I'm all right. If only there was a little air." Bruce Lowry stepped past her and opened the window, and with an effort she struggled to her feet and went over to it, leaning heavily on the narrow sill. Someone called from the passage outside, and the attendant hurried away. From the ballroom, the last taunting refrain of the Destiny waltz still filled the air, and Charmian turned and looked up at the man beside her with hard eyes. "You told him to play that, of course." "Yes." The hot blood dyed her thin face. "You're not very brave, are you?" she said bitterly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I suppose you asked him to play it to see if I remembered, and still minded. Well, I don't mind. I don't care at all. It wasn't for that I fainted, so you need not think it." He made no answer, and after a moment she broke out once more. "Why do you come here? The world's large enough for both of us, isn't it? I shouldn't have thought it would have made you very proud to come here and see me like this." "It doesn't make me proud. It hurts like the devil." She looked at him. Then she broke into scornful laughter. "Do you expect me to believe that?" "No, but it's the truth, whether you believe it or not." She turned round and stared out of the window again into a narrow, dark courtyard below, and after a moment Bruce said gently, "Why are you here, Charmian? What has happened?" She gave a little rough exclamation. "What do you think has happened? Why do you think I'm here? Why, to earn my living, of course. I've got to do something to live." "Your father." The faintest shadow of pain crossed her face. "He's dead." And after a moment she added fiercely, "And I'm glad. He never saw me like this, anyway." There was a tragic silence. Then Bruce Lowry said, "Last night you told me that I was responsible for—" He could not go on, and she finished the sentence for him defiantly. "For bringing me down to this. Well, so you are." "What do you mean?" She stood for a moment, drumming her thin fingers on the window ledge. Then she turned, leaning against the wall and looking up at him defiantly. "I never meant to tell you," she said in a queer, flat sort of way. She said in a queer, flat sort of voice. "But, after all, I think I will. I don't suppose you'll care, but you might, and I'd like to hurt you." That was how he had felt about her during the past 6 years. He had longed to hurt her, longed to see her suffer, and now the wish was fulfilled. He would gladly have given the remaining years of his life to have known it undone. She went on, her darkened eyes still fixed on his face. "It broke my heart when you were sent to prison. I know people say that hearts don't break, but mine did. I can tell you now, and it won't matter, because it's all over and done with. Nothing can ever alter it or make things different, so I can tell you. Perhaps you remember that I was ill. After it happened, I couldn't come to the trial. I was too ill to move, but all the same, when it was over, when they'd sentenced you, I had to be told, and Father told me himself. He cried. I think he was sorry too, in his own way. I didn't cry. I just lay there in bed, and I can remember staring hard at the sky through my window. It was evening, and the clouds were creeping up fast. There was just a little patch of blue sky left with the glow of the sun on it, and I watched that patch grow smaller and smaller all the time Father told me. 6 years penal servitude! 6 years penal servitude! The words seemed to be shouted at me from every corner of the earth at once. She shuddered, as if she could still hear them. And all the time I was thinking, when that little patch of blue sky is quite covered, the sun will never shine for me any more. Never. And it seemed, oh, such a little while before all the clouds met, and the sunshine and the blue sky had gone, and then Father went away and left me alone. Her voice was hoarse with that tragic memory, and Bruce clenched his hands till the nails cut into his palms, but he dared not speak, and after a moment she went on. I lay on the floor all night, hoping I should die. If I had had the strength, I believe I would have killed myself, but I was too ill and weak. I know I just lay there and cried out your name over and over again. Bruce, Bruce, Bruce. Charmaine, for God's sake! A little flicker of amazement filled her eyes. Does it hurt you to hear that? She asked. It doesn't hurt me. I've got over it all years ago. I got over it all that night. The night they took you away. I'd always thought so much of you, you know that, and it was as if I had seen someone tear a mask off your face and show me a devil grinning instead. She pushed the hair back from her forehead with a shaking hand. That's all. I got well, quite well, and life went on. Then father died, and there wasn't any money, and I was lonely. She broke off with a discordant laugh. But you don't want to hear about every step of the way that brought me here. Christopher says I'm killing myself, and I hope I am. I don't want to live. I think life is rotten. I had a good time once, and since then I've suffered all I want to suffer. I've been hungry and cold and miserable. I've suffered everything a woman can suffer and still live. One comfort every day now brings the end of it nearer. She stopped speaking, and for a moment the silence was unbroken, till from the ballroom the orchestra broke suddenly into a crazy jazz tune. Charmian laughed. This is my life now. Hideous, isn't it? And what beats me is, why on earth you want to come to such a place? Where are your people? They won't have anything to do with me. She shrugged her shoulders. Won't they? They wouldn't have helped me then. I was nearly driven to ask them once, all the same. Yes, I thought you'd hate that, she said mockingly, and she saw him wince. I was down and out, starving, really starving, I promise you, and I got as far as your brother's door and was afraid to go in. She laughed. However, I managed without him, you see, and I'm still alive. She went back to the chair and sat down in it. What are you going to do? She asked after a moment. That depends on you. Her eyes widened. On me? That's a good joke. It depends on you, Bruce Lowry said again in a shaken voice. I'd give my life to help you, Charmian, to put you back where you were, where you belong. She stared at him, her face whitening. Then she laughed. How melodramatic. Sorry. But I don't believe you. And anyway, I'm not sure that I want to go back. I've done with love. It's the falsest thing in the world. I've done with all the sickly sentiment and... Charmian! Charmian! The anguish of his voice penetrated even her hardness, and for a moment she sat silent. Then she rose to her feet. I'm going home. Christopher's a good sort. He'll let me off. May I come with you? You're not fit to go alone. I'll only just see you to your door. She looked him up and down with the dull eyes. Then she said in a slow voice of finality, I finished with you 6 years ago. She walked out of the room, a little uncertainly, and he saw her clutch at the doorpost as she passed it to steady herself. But the next moment she was laughing shrilly and chattering to the cloakroom attendant who came to meet her. Ew! Pooh! I'm all right. It was the heat of the room. Nonsense. I can go home alone quite well. Fetch my coat. There's a dear. There was a little pause. Then, good night, came in her voice again, and Bruce heard the tired sound of her retreating step and the bang of the outer door. He found his hat and coat and went downstairs, remorse and grief tearing at his heart with merciless fingers. He seemed to hear across all the dividing years the sound of a girl's anguished voice crying out upon his name. Bruce! 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 His sin had broken her heart and ruined her life. His sin had turned her into a hard, reckless woman who cared no more for him than she cared for any other man in the world, and for his punishment he knew as he walked along the dark street trying to outstrip his bitter pain and remorse, that, in spite of everything, his love for her was as strong as it had been in the old happy days, that he should love her to the end of her life and his. And that is the end of Chapter 5 of The Romance of a Rogue by Ruby M. Ayres. I hope that you enjoyed it and return soon to hear the next one. Have a great day!